Campers, it's me, Ari Lehman, the first Jason Voorhees. From Friday the 13th, I'm here with AJ, and he's got the juiciest slice ready for you. It's dripping with blood. Jason never dies.
What makes a horror film kill memorable, terrific, even in some way profound or poignant? Let's explore. Thanks for checking this out. If anything about it trips your fancy, please like, subscribe, and share.
Yes, yes.
Without further ado, a patient named Browning is confined to a psychiatric hospital because he suffers from delusional parasitosis, which means he hallucinates that he's constantly besieged by masses of squirmy insects. It never stops. It never goes away. They're on him all the time. He can't escape it. The one observing with clinical detachment, Dr. Channard, views the tortured man as an opportunity.
He must have been into this shit for years.
The good doctor's assistant, Dr. McRae, finds more than he bargained for in his superior's home.
What is he doing? What is this?
A lifetime of research into other dimensions, and the puzzle boxes that open doorways to reach these otherworldly realms. The repulsive mattress on the floor has more history than even its gory appearance implies.
That mattress, you've got to destroy that mattress.
Kirsty has seen things, and she knows what she knows.
See, Julia died on it, and she can come back now like Frank.
So rattled from an experience that included tearing a puzzle box out of her stepmother's cold dead hands, so that she could survive an encounter with a rabble of leather-bound oddballs, intent on using her soul as a sex toy.
We have such sights to show you.
She comes off a little crazy, but everything she spouts is so true it might as well be gospel, and Dr. Channard aims to prove it.
Come, Mr. Brown.
Of all the scenarios to be a fly on the wall for, this one would be one of the worst. The good doctor might consider him untreatable. A lost cause with no therapy or drug options available that will free him of the horrid feelings of infestation. Removing the straitjacket reveals its necessity, how habitual picking has left him covered in scars and open wounds.
Get him off me!
What's about to happen could be looked at as the height of cruelty, or, because Browning lives a tortured existence, as a painful mercy.
Please, sit down.
The reasoning probably doesn't matter, though, because this is all a means to an end. Browning is just the perfect patient to fulfill the role Dr. Channard needs, because what he needs is a lot of blood. Guided onto the filthy mattress, it's apparent the man is truly broken, completely compliant and manageable, a threat only to himself. There are moments when decisions are made to chart courses maybe better not taken to their bitter end, but human nature. The good doctor has made his decision, and there will be no parrying now. Whether or not it works, a man will likely die.
Get them off me!
He's about to be sacrificed in hopes of restoring life to a vile woman, an adulteress and murderess who threw away her first crack at life by chasing her darkest desires straight down into the pit of hell.
I'm going to live and you're going to help me, yes?
Yes.
A pairing perfect for this film because it's made in hell. All it takes to supply blood is to provide the mentally unfit man a sharp implement. Perhaps considering logistics or playing through scenarios, Dr. Chernard pauses before what he knows is going to be a gruesome act. Were he to falter now, he would deny himself the answers. Even if it doesn't work, what's the life of one wretched man compared to finding out for sure? Having a patient with an accommodating diagnosis is very convenient, sparing him the dirty work and maybe even providing a measure of plausible deniability. Browning is overjoyed. The sight of the blade excites him because it represents relief. Let the bloodletting commence. No matter how painful and horrifying, he can't help but cut himself to ribbons in a vain attempt to exorcise his body of non-existent vermin. Even as he has the means to cut and scrape away the creepy crawlies he perceives, he still pleads as Dr. Chernard looks on dispassionately.
Get him off me!
Is there a saturation point? How much blood is enough blood? If he were having any doubts, the culmination of his life's curiosity springs forth from the pool of blood and confirms all his hopes. The face emerging out of the gruesome claret conveys a certain delight. There would be something in beating death, a joy and a pleasure, a glee in the return of sensation. Suddenly under attack by what to him has to seem like the granddaddy of all bugs. Even in his shaky mental state, he has the wherewithal to flee from the hideous creature that emerged from the mattress like a maggot out of a corpse. As it is for the mouse dropped in the aquarium of a hungry pet snake, his destiny is to be digested by this serpent. No matter how insane he seems, intent on removing the bugs isn't tantamount to wanting to cash it in. Don't get it twisted. The man has a zest to live, and won't hand over his life easily. The whole time, Dr. McRae has been only a few feet away from this exhilarating and grisly event, in the splatter zone as it were, an audience proxy to fear for, so thoughts of his safety distract from the literal flood of goriness. The way Julia worms her way up, insinuating herself over his body, is bizarrely intimate, even erotic. Like in some way this transference is almost a sexual act, and with all the blood. It's safe to assume Dr. McRae feels de-virginized, his cherry popped. As for Julia's victim, surrounding him very similarly, as I pointed out in my last video, to how a giant water bug overtakes a goldfish. Poor terrified Browning has no prayer of survival, getting expediently appropriated by a thing with a nature so predatory. All this comes completely naturally to her. This must be what they meant when they said the female of the species is more dangerous. Having seen enough to regret ever coming here, Dr. McRae slips out while the slipping is good. And momentarily sated, Julia's spent. Browning's besiegement by tactile illusions now over, Julia has finished him off like a Capri Sun, ready to go in the rubbish bin. What was ultimately a trade-off, a lunatic for a psycho, it might all come down to perceived value. Browning's value was as a supernatural entity's life-reinstating meal of life essence. And what is Julia's value? She hobnobs with gods.
Leviathan, Lord of the Labyrinth.
This one is extraordinary because it's so shocking and visceral and terrifying, it reaches all the way to the most primal level, drawing from a strata of universal fears, from unchecked mental instability to insects, from self-mutilation to spilled blood, from danger due to proximity to threat of exposure, from getting attacked by a relentless predator to getting fed on. It runs a gamut that upon first viewing would leave even the stoutest among us a little breathless. Oh, and it throws in enough gore to choke a team of horses. Although why anyone would want to choke horses, I don't know.
The buffoonery is endless.
Having just covered Julia's exit, I couldn't help but notice the significance of Browning, and how the poor man was used and abused to facilitate the return of one truly despicable lady. The length of that one precluded me from going too deeply into Browning and his plight, but I feel the character is owed his due. Not to mention my wife happened upon this sequence on cable television when she was a kid, and it very well warped her for life.
Like one of those horrible acts against nature that are just seared into your brain like a hot brand.
So I know firsthand its enduring impact. Based on all that, I decided this exploration of Browning's sad exit would make a good addendum to Julia's video. The beleaguered mental patient has to be one of the most pitiable characters ever. The guy was at the mercy of his addled brain, and needed aid to navigate life on even the most stripped-down terms. So taking advantage of him was like canned hunting at its worst. He represents victimhood on like every level. First he's a victim of his own mind, and an irresistible urge to do himself harm. And then the medicos who is supposed to be looking out for his best interest. It seems likely the poor man was committed when he fell into full psychosis, and began implementing frenzied self-harm as a form of relief. Unable to stop the way an addict can't put down the needle, the compulsion to continue too great, despite the escalating harm. Losing all autonomy and free agency can be a necessary step in getting a severely unwell person the help they need. But here, he was put at the mercy of uncaring forces, more concerned with how he could be exploited than curing him. This is an example of how the mentally ill are exploited because they're seen as less than human. Dr. Chernard is supposed to be held to a higher standard by the Hippocratic Oath, and yet he's willing to sacrifice a patient's life to achieve his ends, and a defenseless one at that.
Is that a nice thing for a doctor to do?
A moral, ethical, and principled society takes care of the most vulnerable. If that involves confinement in a dingy dungeon, the society's decency needs to be called into question. Of course, this all comes down to budgets and politicians rolling the dice in a bid to appease without truly governing. So the buck stops at the taxpayers okay with endless war to the tune of trillions, but opposed to a nominal portion of their taxes going to lift up the most downtrodden. This isn't me getting up on a soapbox, it's me speaking the facts. This unsavory glimpse into psychiatric confinement sadly reflects reality, and it's appalling. Even if many such institutions have been closed, in their absence, people like Browning have no safeguards. Where's the happy medium between cost and ethical treatment? It would seem in a world with problems stacked on top of problems, such inquiries only muddle and muddy what's already a quagmire, since funding only goes so far, and what help can be given is allocated as good as can be expected, when bureaucracy has a thumb up the butt of medicine.
Boy, that escalated quickly.
But then, medicine itself is a sticky wicket when it comes to moral boundaries and where they lay.
What?
Pretty much all major medical advancement comes at a steep cost. To test subject animals, to human volunteers, perhaps even to the people who carry out such experimentation, because they have to live with their actions. But sacrifices, apparently, have to be made.
As far as I know, if these creatures weren't here, human medical technology wouldn't be near as advanced as it is.
The good doctor was either born sociopathic or had long since ditched any conscience, trying to find the parameters of a larger picture, only to realize too late he was no less a monster than the thing he resurrected from the mattress, just because he had an excuse bestowed by a medical degree. Without clinical empathy or bedside manner, he went way beyond the skill of emotional separation into the realm of actual evil, by literally and figuratively operating without morality. But couldn't it be argued that since he felt tortured all the time, on some level it was probably in Browning's best interest to go on to the clearing at the end of the path?
Sometimes that is better.
There are many forms of mental illness, but his had to be one of the cruelest. Delusional parasitosis eats away at a person's mind the way the imagined parasites chew away at their vitals. And unless in their case antipsychotic medications work, it's never-ending torment for the sufferers who know no peace. Browning was definitely living what most would consider an absolute nightmare. It doesn't take a phobia for the thought of being covered in bugs to rate as beyond repellent. But wouldn't slice and dicing himself be self-deletion? An act frowned upon by most religious denominations? An enormous sin? Similar to how someone can be found not guilty by reason of insanity, I don't feel like what he did would be viewed on a spiritual level as a premeditated act that was perpetrated with the intent of death. Browning was so overwhelmed with mental illness that he had no control over himself. Slashing himself up for sake of freedom from infestation and subsequently bleeding out wouldn't be the same thing as purposely taking his own life. So if that's not how he would be morally judged, meaning he would probably avoid damnation, wasn't it in some way weirdly compassionate to allow him his druthers? Perhaps, if that were where it ended, that would be the case. The contorted dimensions of horror the situation took on by Julia's inclusion accentuated the whole thing beyond an act that could be regarded as euthanasia, to something so horrific it wasn't only murder, but a particularly brutal murder. An existence that was already so awful, dreadful, and straight-up atrocious shouldn't be ended in such unknowing and terror, prey to something so outside his grasp of understanding, devoured alive as he fought and struggled only to come up short in the fight for his life. For this to be a merciful death would have required Dr. Channard to step in and take a more active role. Outside his character to do so, he wanted the answers to life, the next world, and beyond, but he didn't want to put himself out or get his hands dirty, relying on the sacrifice of others to bring his desires to fruition. The good doctor was a gambler, but since he was a coward, he wasn't willing to gamble with his own flesh, not wanting to put his own skin in the game, so to speak. What if Browning's self-administered flaying had failed to prompt Julia's return? That was a risk he was willing to take. You have to wonder how much the academic in him even believed before the proof was wrestling Browning into submission. The way he looked on without enthusiasm suggested he was indifferent to the sight of suffering either way. It revealed that if possible, the prissy little man was perfectly willing to try to game the system and cheat his way to eternity, first with Browning and all the others, used to restore Julia, and then young savant Tiffany, who had the technical means to solve the puzzle box.
It certainly is.
but it wasn't in her heart and soul to do so.
It is not hands that call us.
Dr. Channard was nothing but a swindler, prepared to bamboozle anybody who would serve his purposes. Were he not craven, he would have sedated and bled Browning, sparing the man terror. Better yet, he would have solved one of the puzzle boxes in his possession and faced the Cenobites on his own, the way it's supposed to be.
Man needs to balance his own accounts.
Looking at it in those terms, the act of sacrificing Browning wasn't only indefensible, it was by itself worthy of damnation, because it was needlessly cruel to one who was the very definition of undeserving. Not to mention, it was committed by an authority figure supposedly held to a higher standard.
It's just terrible.
The Hellraiser films are oddly optimistic, despite their grueling nature, because they posit an afterlife, good and evil, judgment, heaven and hell, so they reaffirm faith, and in so doing give us consolation that our notions of eternal life, which literally go back to earliest man, are well-founded. Although, in some ways, hollow consolation. This is due to the fact that they also show the price of sin, of one failing to live right. Because if this film's depiction of hell were real,
He is in his own hell, just as you are in yours.
it's not a place you'd want to end up. In the context of this world, perhaps Browning was granted the status of martyrdom and allowed entrance through the pearly gates, and into a heaven that had no bugs whatsoever, save for harmless katydids, ladybugs, and butterflies.
That's enough out of you.
Well, I've about reached the end of the rope, so I won't leave you dangling. Thanks for enduring my chatter. Please share any refutations, opinions, accusations, japes, or other ideas in the comments below. And please join me for whatever I'm up to next time.
Not again.
Bye now.
Bye, creepy man! Keep it creepy!
He's a weird guy.
Goodbye.